I just want to let y'all know I found someone that I never want to lose. Myself, bitch. What the fuck you thought this was? Man, I give a fuck about these people.
At exactly 6:47 p.m. on November 23, 2024, 6 gunshots shattered the quiet of a Fort Lauderdale apartment complex. 6 bullets that would end one man's life and expose a killer's twisted mind. But here's what makes this case truly chilling. While 46-year-old Jason Bloomfield's body decomposed for 6 days in a locked bedroom, his killer was posting about God and Satan on Facebook. Satan gets busy, but you gotta know when he's working so you can let God handle up on your behalf, 37-year-old Vianita Linan wrote, just weeks after she had emptied her gun into her boyfriend's chest. She was literally sleeping next to a rotting corpse while preaching about divine justice online. When Jason's 15-year-old son finally discovered his father's body, the smell of death had filled their home for nearly a week. And when police arrived at the scene, Vianita showed up driving her dead boyfriend's car, putting on the performance of her life with what investigators would later describe as fake crying with no tears. So here's the question that'll haunt you. How do you live with a decomposing body for 6 days while posting inspirational quotes about God? Drop a comment if you've ever had a gut feeling about someone that turned out to be terrifyingly accurate, because this case will make you question everyone around you. This is the story of a woman who weaponized faith to hide murder, and the red flags that everyone missed until it was too late. Jason Bloomfield wasn't asking for much from life. At 46 years old, this Fort Lauderdale resident had simple pleasures that kept him grounded. He loved the Miami Dolphins with the passion that only true fans understand, the kind that sticks with a team through every heartbreaking season. His colleagues at Burger King could set their watches by his reliability. Jason showed up every single day, never called in sick, never missed a shift without notice. But what defined Jason most was his devotion to his family. His 15-year-old son meant everything to him. They had the kind of close relationship where missing a call or text was unusual. Jason's mother was also central to his world. The 3 generations stayed in constant contact, checking on each other regularly. Jason shared an apartment with his girlfriend, Vianita Linan. From the outside, they looked like any couple struggling to make ends meet in expensive South Florida. Money was tight, bills were piling up, and eviction notices were becoming a reality. But nothing about their financial stress suggested it was worth killing over. November 23, 2024 started as an ordinary Saturday for Jason. He had no idea that the woman sleeping beside him had already decided it would be his last day on Earth. He couldn't have known that within hours, 6 bullets would tear through his body while he sat in his own living room. That evening, around dinner time, neighbors heard something that would haunt the investigation for months, 6 gunshots echoing from Jason and Vianita's unit. 6 deliberate shots fired in rapid succession. Not the panicked single shot of someone defending themselves, this was execution. Those neighbors made a decision that investigators would later regret. Instead of calling 911, they assumed it was firecrackers, or maybe a car backfiring. In today's world, that assumption cost Jason Bloomfield his life and gave his killer nearly a week to cover her tracks. But while those gunshots were ending Jason's life, they were just the beginning of Vianita's calculated performance that would shock even seasoned detectives. Vianita Linan wasn't some random girlfriend who snapped under pressure. At 4 feet, 11 inches tall, she might have looked harmless, but her criminal record told a different story. Born in Detroit and bouncing between Miami-Dade and Broward counties, Vianita was what prosecutors would later classify as a career criminal, someone who made breaking the law a lifestyle. Her past was littered with convictions that should have been warning signs to anyone who got close to her. But if you scrolled through Vianita's Facebook page, you'd see a completely different person. She posted constantly about God, work, family, and living comfortably. Her social media presence was filled with inspirational quotes and religious proclamations that painted her as a woman of faith trying to better her life. "My priorities are God, work, family, and living comfortably," she had posted just weeks before the murder. To anyone reading her posts, Vianita appeared to be someone who had found her way through faith and determination. The reality was much darker. Financial stress was crushing both Jason and Vianita. They weren't just short on rent, they were facing eviction from their Fort Lauderdale apartment. The pressure of losing their home was building to a breaking point. But while Jason was probably thinking about picking up extra shifts or finding a cheaper place to live, Vianita's mind was going to much more sinister places. The relationship was also deteriorating. According to stories Vianita would later tell neighbors and family members, Jason was cheating on her with his problematic ex-girlfriend. She painted herself as the victim of a man who couldn't stay faithful, someone who deserved sympathy rather than suspicion. But here's what investigators would later discover: every single story about cheating was a lie. Jason and Vianita were still living together when he died. They hadn't broken up. The infidelity story was just another manipulation tactic from a woman who had spent years perfecting her victim persona. November 23rd wasn't just any day for their relationship troubles to explode. The combination was toxic: a career criminal facing homelessness, living with a man she was preparing to murder, all while maintaining her facade of religious devotion on social media. Her Facebook posts about Satan getting busy weren't random spiritual thoughts, they were the mindset of someone who was already planning something evil while preparing to blame it on divine intervention. November 24, 2024. Something unprecedented happened at the Burger King where Jason Bloomfield had worked faithfully for years. Jason didn't show up for his scheduled shift. His manager stared at the clock, then at the schedule, growing more concerned by the hour. In all his time at the restaurant, Jason had never been a no-show. If he couldn't make it to work, he called ahead. He was the kind of employee managers could count on. The manager tried calling Jason's phone multiple times throughout the day. Each call went straight to voicemail. By the end of what should have been Jason's shift, concern was turning into genuine worry. Meanwhile, Jason's family was experiencing their own panic. His 15-year-old son tried calling and texting repeatedly. Nothing. His mother, who spoke with Jason regularly, was met with complete silence. For a man who maintained close contact with his family, this disappearance was terrifying. But while everyone who cared about Jason was sick with worry, Vianita Linon was busy crafting her web of lies. When neighbors asked about the gunshots they'd heard the night before, she had her story ready: a friend of hers had fired those shots nearby. Just some random incident that had nothing to do with her or Jason. When Jason's family called the apartment looking for him, Vianita's story changed completely. She told them she and Jason had broken up because he was cheating with his problematic ex-girlfriend. According to her version, Jason had simply walked out of her life. But here's what makes this story absolutely chilling: Jason's body was still in that apartment. He'd never left. He couldn't leave. Vianita had dragged his corpse into the small bedroom after shooting him 6 times in the living room. For 6 days, she lived with his decomposing body while telling everyone who asked that he had abandoned her. The GPS records would later show that Vianita left the apartment multiple times during those 6 days. She went to work. She ran errands. She drove around in Jason's silver BMW like nothing had happened. All while his body was rotting in their shared bedroom. But perhaps the most disturbing evidence of her calculated evil was what she posted on Facebook during this time. On December 11th, while Jason's corpse had been decomposing for weeks, Vianita wrote, "Satan gets busy, but you gotta know when it's working so you can let God handle up on your behalf. Can't get me, but he will get got messing round with a anointed child of God." She was literally living with the evidence of her own evil while posting about being God's anointed child. The level of delusion and manipulation was staggering. Meanwhile, technology was quietly building the case against her. Cell phone records showed she was using Jason's phone to access his bank account. GPS data tracked her movements around Fort Lauderdale in his car. Most damning of all, Zelle transfers showed her stealing $500 from Jason's account after she had murdered him. Think about the coldness required for that. Your boyfriend is dead in the next room, and you're stealing his money. This wasn't desperation, it was calculated theft from a man she had just executed. November 29, 2024. 6 days of silence. 6 days of unanswered calls and growing panic from Jason's family. His 15-year-old son couldn't take the worry anymore. Neither could Jason's mother. They had been calling, texting, and agonizing over where Jason could be. He would never just disappear like this without telling anyone. They decided to go to the apartment and check on him themselves. Picture this moment, a teenage boy and his grandmother walking up to an apartment door, probably discussing who should knock first. They were worried, maybe even scared, but they had no idea they were about to walk into a nightmare that would traumatize them for life. They knocked. No answer. They called out Jason's name. Still nothing. Finally, they noticed that the back door had been removed from its hinges, something that had happened before. They moved the door aside and entered the apartment. The smell hit them first. Anyone who has ever encountered death knows that smell. It's sweet, sickening, and absolutely unmistakable. But they probably didn't recognize it immediately. Maybe they thought something had spoiled in the refrigerator or there was a plumbing problem. Then they found him. Jason Bloomfield's body was in the small bedroom, already in what police would later describe as advanced stages of decomposition. For 6 days in Florida's heat and humidity, his corpse had been rotting away while his killer went about her daily routine. Imagine being that 15-year-old boy. Imagine searching for your father and finding his decomposed body hidden under a pile of clothes and blankets. Imagine the scream that tore from his throat when he realized what he was looking at. Imagine his grandmother trying to shield him from the sight while fumbling for her phone to call 911. The 911 call that came in that day was heartbreaking. A family member finding their loved one dead is always tragic, but finding them like this, after days of wondering where they were, after days of hoping they were okay, is the kind of trauma that changes people forever. Within minutes, police cars and ambulances were racing toward the Fort Lauderdale apartment. Crime scene investigators were called in. The medical examiner was notified. What had started as a missing person case was now officially a homicide investigation. But here's where this story takes an even more twisted turn. While Jason's son and mother were making the most horrific discovery of their lives, Vianita Linon was somewhere else entirely, probably thinking she had gotten away with the perfect murder. She was wrong. Just as police were securing the crime scene and processing the horror they were witnessing, something incredible happened. Vianita Linon showed up. She pulled into the apartment complex parking lot driving Jason's silver BMW. Think about that audacity for a moment. She was driving her murder victim's car to the scene where his body had just been discovered. The boldness was breathtaking, but what happened next was even more shocking. As soon as Vianita saw the police cars and ambulances, she immediately started wailing about how devastated she was to learn about Jason's death. She was crying, screaming, making a huge scene about her grief and shock. But there was one crucial problem with her performance. The police officer who watched her act wrote something very specific in his report that would become key evidence. Vianita was fake crying with no tears. She was making all the sounds of someone who was heartbroken, but her eyes were completely dry. This wasn't grief, this was acting, and it was terrible acting at that. The officers trained I caught what family members might have missed in their own shock and trauma. Real grief doesn't look like a performance. Real tears don't turn on and off like a faucet. But Vianita was putting on a show, and seasoned investigators weren't buying any of it. While she was busy with her fake crying routine, detectives were already starting to piece together what had really happened. They talked to neighbors who confirmed hearing 6 gunshots on November 23rd. They spoke with Jason's manager at Burger King, who confirmed he'd never shown up for work after that date. Most importantly, they started examining Vianita's various stories, and those stories were falling apart faster than she could tell them. Remember how she told neighbors that a friend had fired those gunshots nearby? Detectives checked police records for the area that night. No reports of gunshots anywhere else in the neighborhood. No calls about random shooting incidents. Her story was complete fiction. Then there was the story about Jason cheating and them breaking up. But if they'd broken up, why was she still living in the apartment? Why was she driving his car? Why hadn't anyone else heard about this dramatic breakup between a couple who lived together? The crime scene itself told an even more damning story. Jason's body had been moved after death. He hadn't died in that small bedroom where his family found him. Blood evidence showed he'd been shot in the living room, then dragged to the bedroom. Someone had also tried to clean up the blood and moved a couch to block the bedroom door. This was calculated. Someone had killed Jason, moved his body, attempted to clean up evidence, and then went on with their life for 6 days while his corpse decomposed. And that someone was standing right in front of them, fake crying without a single real tear. As detectives processed more evidence, they discovered something that made their blood run cold. Vianita had been using Jason's phone after his death, sending text messages to his family members from his number. "I'm with my friend from the past," she had written to Jason's sister, pretending to be him. "Me and Vita aren't working out, so she went back to her family's house and I'm single now." Jason's sister later told police that these messages were unusually long and sent late at night, compared to his normal communication style. She knew something was wrong, but she couldn't have imagined her brother was already dead while someone else was using his phone. In today's world, your phone tells a story whether you want it to or not, and Vianita Linon's digital footprint was about to become her downfall. When detectives pulled her cell phone records and GPS data, they found evidence that was absolutely damning. Her phone showed she had been at the apartment on November 23rd when those 6 gunshots were fired. Not nearby visiting a friend, not out of town, she was right there when Jason died. The GPS coordinates placed her exactly where the murder happened at exactly the time it happened. But the technology told an even more disturbing story. After Jason was dead, Vianita had systematically accessed his bank account using his phone. She made Zelle transfers to herself, stealing money from a man whose corpse was rotting in the next room. Think about the level of coldness required for that, methodically draining your murder victim's accounts while sleeping next to his decomposing body. The crime scene reconstruction painted a picture that was even more horrifying. Jason hadn't died in that small bedroom where his family found him. Blood spatter evidence showed he'd been shot multiple times in the living room, probably while he was just sitting there, maybe watching TV or eating dinner. 6 gunshots. That's not someone who panicked and fired once in self-defense. That's not an accident or a crime of passion. That's execution. Vianita had deliberately emptied her gun into Jason, making absolutely sure he was dead. After the murder came the cover-up that showed just how calculated this killing really was. Vianita had dragged Jason's body from the living room into the small bedroom. Picture that scene. A 4'11" woman dragging a grown man's dead weight across apartment floors. The blood trail, the physical effort required, the complete lack of emotion needed to treat your boyfriend's corpse like furniture. She then tried to clean up the blood using Clorox bleach, rags, and a mop. But cleaning up blood isn't as easy as it looks in movies. Blood seeps into cracks, soaks into wood, leaves microscopic traces that forensic investigators can find even when you think you've scrubbed everything clean. After attempting to erase the evidence, Vianita moved a couch to block the bedroom door where Jason's body was hidden. This wasn't panic, this was planning. She was creating a barrier so that if anyone came to the apartment, they wouldn't accidentally discover what she'd done. The cell phone evidence revealed perhaps the most chilling aspect of her behavior. While Jason's family was frantically calling and texting him, worried sick about where he was, Vianita was reading those messages. She was watching his mother panic. She was seeing his 15-year-old son's desperate texts asking where his dad was. And she did nothing. She let them suffer for 6 days, knowing exactly where Jason was and exactly what had happened to him. The GPS data showed Vianita had left the apartment multiple times during those 6 days. She went to work, ran errands, and drove around in Jason's car like nothing had happened. All while his body was decomposing in their shared home. But perhaps the most damning piece of digital evidence was her Facebook activity during this period. While living with her victim's corpse, she was posting about God and Satan and divine justice. "Satan gets busy, but you gotta know when he's working so you can let God handle up on your behalf," she wrote, while literally surrounded by the evidence of her own evil. Every lie she had told was falling apart under technological scrutiny. Every story was being exposed as complete fiction. The evidence was overwhelming, and it all pointed to one terrifying conclusion: Vianita Linon had murdered Jason Bloomfield in cold blood, then spent 6 days living with his corpse while stealing his money and lying to everyone who loved him. The investigation took months as detectives built what they knew would need to be an airtight case. Every piece of evidence had to be processed, every lie had to be documented, Every aspect of Vianita's deception had to be proven beyond reasonable doubt. On May 2, 2025, more than 5 months after Jason's murder, justice finally caught up with Vianita Linon. A patrol officer in Fort Lauderdale recognized her from the arrest warrant and took her into custody. After months of thinking she had gotten away with the perfect murder, her freedom was over. But prosecutors weren't finished with her yet. When they examined Vianita's extensive criminal history, they saw a pattern that went far beyond this single murder. On May 5, they filed what's called a career criminal felony case against her. This wasn't just about Jason's death anymore, this was about a woman who had made crime her way of life. The charges were severe. Second-degree murder with a firearm and fraudulent use of a deceased person's personal identification information. That second charge stemmed from her theft of Jason's money after killing him, adding financial crime to cold-blooded murder. On May 28, Vianita stood before a judge for her arraignment. This was her opportunity to show some remorse, to admit what she had done, to acknowledge the pain she had caused Jason's family. Instead, she pleaded not guilty to all charges. Even with overwhelming evidence against her, even with her lies completely exposed, even with digital proof of her guilt, Vianita was still trying to manipulate the system. She was still playing the victim instead of accepting responsibility for murder. The judge wasn't buying her performance. Bond was denied, meaning Vianita would remain locked up at the Paul Rain detention facility in Pompano Beach while awaiting trial. No amount of fake tears or religious posts would get her out this time. As of now, she's still there, still claiming innocence, still refusing to take responsibility for the cold-blooded execution of Jason Bloomfield. But the evidence speaks louder than her lies ever could. This case is a masterclass in recognizing red flags before they turn deadly. Jason Bloomfield should still be alive today, and the warning signs were there for anyone who knew how to look. Vianita's criminal history should have been the biggest red flag. She wasn't someone who had made one mistake years ago, she was a career criminal with a pattern of escalating behavior. People don't usually go straight from petty crime to murder, but they do escalate when they feel trapped and desperate. The financial stress was another crucial warning sign. When people are facing homelessness and have a history of choosing crime over legitimate solutions, that desperation can turn deadly. Jason and Vianita weren't just short on rent, they were about to lose their home entirely. Her constantly changing stories should have raised immediate suspicions. When someone's explanation for important events keeps shifting, when details don't add up, when simple questions get complicated answers, those are signs of deception that can indicate much bigger problems. The neighbors who heard those 6 gunshots made a crucial mistake. In today's world, we cannot afford to assume that sounds like gunshots are something innocent. When you hear what might be gunfire, especially multiple shots in rapid succession, call 911 immediately. Let police decide if it's worth investigating. Jason's co-workers and family did everything right. They noticed when he disappeared, and they took action. But imagine if someone had recognized the warning signs earlier, if someone had seen how desperate Vianita was becoming about money, if someone had questioned her shifting stories about their relationship. The social media disconnect was another red flag that's becoming increasingly common. When someone's online persona doesn't match their real-life behavior, when they're posting about God and morality while living completely different lives, that's a warning sign worth paying attention to. Most importantly, this case shows us that financial stress can be a deadly trigger when it meets the wrong person. If you're in a relationship where money problems are causing constant conflict, get help. If your partner has a criminal history and starts acting desperate about finances, don't ignore those warning signs. Jason Bloomfield's murder didn't just end one life, it destroyed an entire family and traumatized a community that thought they were safe from this kind of evil. Jason's 15-year-old son will carry the trauma of finding his father's decomposed body for the rest of his life. That image, that smell, that moment when he realized what he was looking at, it's the kind of experience that changes someone forever. No teenager should have to discover their parent's corpse, especially not after days of decomposition in the Florida heat. Jason's mother will never forget the horror of that day. She'll never forget the panic of those 6 days when Jason wasn't answering his phone. She'll never stop wondering if there was something she could have done differently, some sign she should have recognized. The neighbors who heard those gunshots but didn't call police will live with guilt for the rest of their lives. They know that their decision to assume it was something innocent gave Vianita 6 days to cover her tracks and traumatized Jason's family even more than necessary. Jason's co-workers at Burger King lost someone they counted on every single day. His absence left a hole in their workplace that reminds them daily that violence can reach anyone, anywhere, at any time. But perhaps the most tragic ripple effect is how this case will make everyone a little more suspicious, a little less trusting. When someone can murder their boyfriend and live with his corpse for 6 days while posting about God on Facebook, it makes you question everyone around you. The Fort Lauderdale community learned that evil can hide behind religious posts and fake tears. They learned that financial stress can turn deadly when it meets the wrong person. They learned that the people we trust most can sometimes be the most dangerous. This case teaches us crucial lessons about recognizing danger before it's too late. Here's what Jason Bloomfield's story should teach all of us. Trust your instincts about people. If someone's behavior doesn't match their words, if their stories keep changing, if something feels off about them, listen to that internal warning system. Your gut feelings exist for a reason. Pay attention to criminal histories. When someone has a pattern of breaking the law, especially with escalating charges, that's a predictor of future behavior. Career criminals don't usually stop being criminals just because they're in a relationship. Recognize financial desperation as a danger sign. When people are facing homelessness and have a history of choosing crime over legitimate solutions, that combination can turn deadly. Financial stress doesn't excuse murder, but it can trigger it in people who are already dangerous. Don't ignore sounds of violence. If you hear what might be gunshots, call police immediately. Don't assume someone else will report it. Don't assume it's something innocent. Let trained professionals investigate. Watch for social media red flags. When someone's online persona is dramatically different from their real-life behavior, that disconnect can indicate serious psychological problems. People who post constantly about morality while living immoral lives are often the most dangerous. Pay attention to isolation tactics. If your partner starts cutting you off from family and friends, if they discourage you from maintaining other relationships, if they want to control who you talk to, those are signs of someone who might be planning something terrible. Document everything. If you're in a relationship with someone who has concerning behavior, keep records. Save text messages, document strange incidents, tell trusted friends about problems. This evidence could save your life or help convict your killer. Most importantly, never ignore multiple red flags just because you love someone. Love doesn't excuse criminal behavior. Love doesn't make violence acceptable. Love doesn't mean you have to put yourself in danger to save someone who doesn't want to be saved. As we wrap up this horrific case, I want to hear from you, our true crime family. This story raises so many questions about how we protect ourselves and recognize danger. What do you think was the biggest red flag that could have saved Jason's life? Was it Vianita's criminal history? The financial stress? Her changing stories? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever been in a situation where your gut was telling you someone was dangerous, but you ignored it to be polite? How many of us dismiss our instincts because we don't want to hurt someone's feelings or seem paranoid? What would you do if you heard 6 gunshots coming from your neighbor's apartment? Be honest, would you call 911 immediately, or would you convince yourself it was something innocent? How do you think Jason's 15-year-old son will recover from the trauma of finding his father's body? What kind of support does a teenager need after experiencing something that horrific? Should people with extensive criminal histories face more restrictions when it comes to relationships and living situations? Is there a way to protect potential victims without violating civil rights? What's the most disturbing part of this case to you? Is it the 6 days of living with the corpse? The fake crying at the crime scene? The religious Facebook posts while surrounded by evidence of murder? I want to hear your thoughts, your experiences, and your theories. Your comments help create a community where we can all learn to recognize danger and protect each other. If this case opened your eyes to red flags you hadn't considered before, hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. When cases like this develop new information, when trials begin, when justice is finally served, you'll be the first to know. Share this video with someone who needs to hear Jason's story. Because staying informed isn't just about true crime entertainment, it's about protecting ourselves and the people we love from predators who are still out there, still hiding behind fake smiles and religious posts. Remember Jason Bloomfield. Remember the warning signs. And remember that your safety is worth more than anyone's feelings. Until next time, stay safe, stay aware, and trust your instincts. They might just save your life.
Shemaya Allen was just 18 years old. She had her whole life ahead of her, dreams, ambitions, and a young son to care for. She was the kind of person who made everyone around her smile, full of life and hope for a future that felt full of possibility. But in a single moment, everything she had hoped for was ripped away. It was a night that should have been like any other, but it wasn't. Shemaya walked into a room that would change everything. Her boyfriend, Brian Jackson Tats, lying in bed with another woman. A woman who wasn't her. A woman who had no place in her world. The shock hit her like a punch to the gut. Her heart pounded in her chest, her breath caught in her throat. All the trust she had built, all the love she had given, crumbled in an instant. In that moment, the reality of her relationship with Brian came crashing down. It was never what it seemed. What she had thought was love was nothing more than manipulation, control, and betrayal. That night, Shemaya's world shattered, and the consequences would be far worse than she could have ever imagined. What would this discovery mean for her? How would this unravel the life she thought she was building? What choice would she make in a moment of desperation and heartbreak? The tragic truth is that the pain of that betrayal would lead Shemaya to a devastating fate. What happened that night? Was it a moment of desperation from a young woman pushed to the edge, or was there something more? Was Shemaya's life truly her own, or had she been trapped in a cycle of abuse that no one saw? As the questions linger, one thing becomes undeniable. Shemaya Allen's story is one of love, manipulation, and a life stolen too soon. This is not just the story of a young woman's heartbreak, it's a story of control, the kind that no one talks about, and the tragic consequences that no one ever expects. Stay with us because what happened next will leave you questioning everything you know about love and the dangers of manipulation. Before we dive deeper into this heartbreaking story, I want to take a moment to stress why it's so important to share Shemaya's story. This isn't just about one young woman's tragic fate. It's about recognizing the signs of manipulation and emotional abuse that many people, especially young women, face in relationships. We need to talk about these issues, break the silence, and raise awareness. As you watch this documentary unfold, I encourage you to reflect on what you're seeing. Do you think Shemaya's death could have been prevented? What could have been done differently to help her before it was too late? I want to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let's get the conversation started. Your voice matters, and together we can help others understand the importance of emotional awareness and protecting themselves from toxic relationships. Now let's dig into Shemaya's story. Before the world stole her chance at happiness, Shemaya Allen was a bright and hopeful young woman. Born in Seaford, Delaware, she grew up surrounded by the love of her family, a community that encouraged her to dream big. Though life in her small town was quiet, Shemaya's spirit was anything but. She had big dreams of becoming something more, something beyond the borders of the life she knew. From a young age, she was known for her laughter, her energy, and a smile that could light up any room. Shemaya was the kind of girl who believed in the goodness of the world, a girl who thought that love was something pure and beautiful. She was still figuring out what she wanted from life, but one thing was clear. She didn't want to be confined by the limitations of her small world. She had hopes of one day becoming someone important, someone who could make a real difference, who could have a future filled with opportunity and joy. But, like so many young women, she didn't fully understand the dangers that could lurk just beneath the surface of the relationships she formed. Shemaya's family was a cornerstone in her life. Her mother, a strong and loving woman, instilled in her a sense of responsibility and care. Her younger years were filled with support from those closest to her, parents who pushed her to strive for the best and a close-knit circle of friends who always had her back. Yet, as much as she loved her family and felt a sense of security with them, she also craved something more, something outside of their protective bubble. And then, at the age of 16, Shemaiah met Brian Jackson. He was everything Shemaiah thought she wanted at the time. Brian, 15 years her senior, exuded confidence in a way that was intoxicating. He was a tattoo artist, worldly, experienced, and full of the kind of charm that made a young girl like Shemaiah believe she was special. Brian had that aura of maturity, that ability to make her feel seen, like she was the center of his universe. He had a way with words, carefully chosen, deliberate words that made Shemaiah feel grown up, wanted, and desired. From the moment they met, Shemaiah was drawn to him. He was different from the boys she went to school with, older, more sophisticated, and seemingly in control of his own life. He made her feel special in ways that no one else had. He gave her the attention she craved and for a while, made her believe in the kind of fairy tale romance she had always dreamed of. In his presence she felt alive, he made her feel like she could take on the world. Brian, with his tattoos and rough exterior, knew exactly how to speak to Shemaiah's insecurities. He made her feel important. He introduced her to a world that seemed exciting, full of promise, one that would take her far beyond the small town she had known. For the first time she felt like she had a place where she belonged, a relationship that was just for her. In his eyes she saw a future. But what she couldn't yet see was how this relationship would slowly take everything away from her. In the beginning, Shemaiah's innocence was still intact. She believed that love, as she had always imagined it, was finally within her grasp. Brian was everything she thought she wanted, and she entered the relationship with hope in her heart. She wanted to believe it was real, that he cared for her, that she was finally worthy of the love she had dreamed of. But little did she know, she was stepping into something much darker than she could have ever anticipated. A web of manipulation, control, and emotional turmoil that would change her forever. In those early days, Shemaiah's heart was full of the hope that only a young girl could have. She trusted Brian completely, believing he would be the one to help her chase her dreams. But the path that lay ahead was one she never could have prepared for, one that would unravel her innocence and destroy the future she had hoped for. Polyamory, at its core, is the practice or desire of having intimate relationships with multiple partners, with the consent and knowledge of everyone involved. While it can be fulfilling for some, it requires a delicate balance of communication, trust, and respect. For Brian Jackson Tats, polyamory wasn't just a lifestyle, it was a justification for his actions, a way to control and manipulate those around him. He used the idea of multiple relationships to create a facade of freedom and choice, but in reality, it was all about power. Brian introduced Shemaiah to polyamory soon after their relationship began. At first, it seemed like a harmless idea, one that made her feel unique and mature. Brian wasn't like the other men she had encountered. He was older, experienced, and offered a world full of possibilities. He told her that love didn't have to be confined to just one person, that it was okay to have multiple connections. To a 16-year-old girl who was still figuring out what love even meant, this idea was tempting, even liberating. Brian framed it as a progressive, enlightened way to love. Love isn't limited, he would say. It's not about ownership, it's about freedom. At first, Shemaiah accepted Brian's version of polyamory with open arms. The idea that love wasn't constrained by traditional boundaries seemed like an exciting prospect, especially coming from someone who made her feel seen and desired. In her youthful innocence, she justified his multiple relationships as just another part of who Brian was. She told herself that as long as he made her feel special, that's all that mattered. She thought she could handle it, that she could share him, because in her mind, their connection was unique, and that would always keep them close. But soon the cracks began to show. What seemed like a carefree, open relationship quickly started to feel suffocating. Brian's words didn't match his actions. Though he made her believe in the concept of freedom, he never let Shemaiah feel free. He juggled several other women, and Shemaiah, despite what she told herself, couldn't ignore the jealousy that began to build inside her. The late-night phone calls, the secrecy, the constant reassurance that everything would be fine, it didn't feel like love. It felt like a game, and she was constantly fighting for a place in his world that seemed to have no space for her alone. As the months went by, Shemaiah began to feel emotionally drained. The excitement of a polyamorous lifestyle turned into emotional exhaustion. It wasn't just about sharing Brian anymore, it was about competing for his attention, trying to hold on to a love that was never hers alone. While Brian presented polyamory as a way to share love freely, he didn't seem to understand or care that Shemaiah wanted to be loved as an individual, not as just one of many. The more she fought to keep him close, the more distant he became. Brian's multiple partners became an increasing source of tension. Shemaya had never felt more isolated. She felt like she was trapped in a cycle, constantly questioning her worth, wondering if she was good enough for Brian, if he could ever truly choose her. With every new woman who entered Brian's life, her self-esteem plummeted. The more she tried to prove herself, the more she found herself at odds with the reality of her situation. Polyamory was supposed to be a way to build connections, but instead, it left her feeling alone, confused, and unimportant. The emotional toll of living in this polyamorous dynamic began to break Shemaya down. She had no control over her own life anymore. What started as a hopeful, open relationship turned into an emotional battlefield where she fought for scraps of affection. She became consumed by jealousy, jealous of the other women who seemed to have a part of Brian that she couldn't access, jealous of the time he spent with them, and worst of all, jealous of the person she was becoming. The more she compared herself to Brian's other partners, the more she began to doubt her own worth. She was no longer the carefree, confident young woman she had been when they first met. Instead, she was someone who constantly needed reassurance, who felt like she was losing herself in a relationship built on shifting, unstable ground. It became clear that what she had believed was freedom was, in fact, manipulation. Brian's power over her grew, and her feelings of isolation deepened. She wasn't free. She was trapped in a web of emotional control that Brian expertly wove around her. The polyamory wasn't about love, it was about keeping her exactly where he wanted her. Fighting for his attention, constantly seeking approval, and never feeling truly secure. As Shemaya's world grew smaller, her jealousy and emotional distress reached a breaking point. The more Brian's other relationships flourished, the more she withdrew into herself. The facade of a carefree, open relationship slowly cracked. Shemaya found herself spiraling, unable to hold on to the dream of a perfect, inclusive love that she had clung to at the beginning. She had become a prisoner to her own emotions, locked in a cycle of self-doubt and heartache, and Brian, the man who promised her freedom, had become the one who held all the power. The slow unraveling of Shemaya and Brian's relationship began subtly, almost imperceptibly at first. Early on, Brian's affection seemed endless, but as time passed, his emotional distance became undeniable. The first sign of trouble was when Brian began pulling away, leaving Shemaya to wonder what had changed. Small arguments started to creep in, disagreements that once would have been resolved easily but now seemed to fester, leaving Shemaya feeling unheard and invisible. Brian's manipulations were subtle at first. He would shower her with affection after an argument, only to withdraw again, leaving Shemaya desperate for more. His gaslighting tactics made her question her own feelings, her own instincts. When she expressed concern, he dismissed it. "You're overthinking things, babe," he'd say, convincing her that her doubts were irrational. As Shemaya became more emotionally invested, her world became more chaotic. Brian's polyamorous lifestyle, once an exciting prospect, began to feel suffocating. Shemaya found herself caught in a constant battle for his attention, competing with other women who seemed to hold a permanent place in his life. The jealousy started small, almost like a quiet whisper in the back of her mind. But soon it grew louder, consuming her every thought. Every time Brian's phone buzzed, her heart would race. Every time he mentioned another woman, her stomach would churn. Shemaya felt isolated, cut off from her family, from her friends, and even from herself. Brian had manipulated her into believing that she didn't need anyone else, that no one could understand their special connection. But the more isolated she became, the more she began to question her own worth. Was she enough for him? Or was she just another piece in his world of chaos? The tipping point came one night when Shemaya saw Brian with another woman. The jealousy that had been simmering for so long exploded. She had lost herself completely in the fight for his love, and now, standing on the precipice of losing him, she felt empty and broken. It was late in the evening when Shemaya decided to pay Brian a visit. The tension between them had been building for days, small fights over nothing, moments of silence stretching between them like an ever-widening gap. She told herself it was just a rough patch, that they could talk things through and fix it. She walked through the door of his apartment, trying to push aside the unease gnawing at her stomach. She didn't expect what she was about to find. Shemaya stepped into the living room, the silence wrapping around her like a cloak. The apartment was dimly lit, shadows stretching across the walls, creating an eerie calm. Her heart raced as if the universe itself was warning her. She didn't know why, but she had to check on him tonight. She made her way toward the bedroom, the familiar rhythm of her footsteps now disrupted by a sense of dread. And then she saw it. The door was slightly ajar. From the small crack, she could just make out the bed, Her bed, the one she had shared with Brian countless times. As she pushed the door open, her breath caught in her throat. There, in plain view, was Brian. In bed with another woman. Their bodies tangled together under the sheets, the woman's face pressed close to his as they slept, unaware of the storm that was about to hit. The world around her seemed to blur. At first, Shemaya stood frozen, her mind unable to process what she was seeing. No, this can't be real, she thought. But it was real. Her chest tightened, her heart sinking into her stomach as the wave of betrayal crashed over her. She couldn't move. She couldn't speak. All she could do was stare, as if this might somehow make sense if she kept looking. But it didn't. Nothing made sense anymore. When Brian finally stirred, his eyes widened in panic. "Shemaya, wait," he began, but his words were cut off as the flood of anger and hurt exploded inside her. "What the hell is this?" Her voice was sharp, trembling with rage. "What the hell is this, Brian?" The woman in his bed scrambled, embarrassed, as Brian fumbled to cover himself. But it was too late, the damage was done. Shemaya's heart shattered as she stood there, feeling the weight of his betrayal pressing down on her. She felt exposed, vulnerable, like every ounce of trust she had given him had been torn apart in an instant. Brian scrambled for an explanation, but his words were hollow. He tried to assure her that it wasn't what she thought. It's just casual," he stammered. "You know how I am, Shemaya. You've seen this before." But Shemaya couldn't breathe. The more he spoke, the more his words twisted the knife deeper. She wanted to scream, to lash out, but all she could feel was the gut-wrenching realization that this wasn't love. It never had been. The man she had poured her heart into, who had promised her a future, who had made her believe she was the one, had used her. And for what? For this? Another woman in his bed? The jealousy, the anger, the betrayal, every emotion collided in a painful rush. She couldn't stay. She couldn't be in this room, in this relationship anymore. But even as she turned away, the realization that this moment marked the end of everything hit her like a punch to the gut. She had loved him. She had trusted him. And in that moment, Shemaya understood that the love she had fought for was a lie. The emotional devastation was overwhelming. She felt like she had been living in a fantasy, a beautiful dream that had shattered in the cruelest way. And as she walked out of the room, leaving Brian and his other woman behind, it was clear. Their relationship was beyond repair. This was the beginning of the end. January 29, 2025, began like any other day for Shemaya Allen, but by the end of the night, her life would be tragically cut short, leaving behind a trail of questions and heartache. The tension between her and Brian Jackson had reached a breaking point. Weeks of emotional strain, jealousy, and manipulation had pushed her to the edge. Despite the pain, Shemaya couldn't seem to walk away from the man she thought she loved. But that night, everything would unravel. Shemaya had been feeling the weight of her relationship for some time. The emotional abuse, the isolation, and the constant competition with Brian's other partners had taken its toll. She tried to suppress the jealousy, tried to tell herself that she could handle it, but inside, the turmoil was growing. It was a feeling of desperation, feeling like she was losing him, like she was being pushed further away with each passing day. And that night, she couldn't take it any longer. It started with a confrontation. Shemaya, fueled by frustration and betrayal, went to Brian's house. She was determined to confront him, to demand answers once and for all. As she stood at his door, her heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of anger and hurt building up inside her. She needed closure, or at least some semblance of it. What happened after that is still shrouded in mystery. Brian's 911 call painted a picture of a woman out of control, desperate and armed. According to Brian, Shemaya had broken into his house, carrying a gun, threatening him. His voice was frantic, yet there was something strangely detached about his tone. He claimed that he had no choice but to defend himself, stating that he had acted in self-defense when Shemaya attacked him. His version of events seemed rehearsed, as if he had already constructed the narrative in his mind. When the police arrived, they found Shemaya lying lifeless on the floor with a gunshot wound to her head. The scene was chaotic. Brian was calm, too calm, giving conflicting accounts of what had happened. Some officers noted the strange lack of grief in his demeanor. There was no visible remorse, no emotional breakdown from a man who had just lost the mother of his child. Instead, he was focused on shifting the blame, repeating his claims of self-defense, painting Shemaya as the aggressor. The investigation into Shemaya's death quickly spiraled into a web of conflicting stories. Did Shemaya truly pull a gun on Brian, or had she been pushed so far by his emotional manipulation that she saw no other way out? Were Brian's claims of self-defense genuine, or had he orchestrated the situation to make himself appear as the victim? The police dug deeper, questioning Brian's behavior, especially his lack of emotion and his rapid attempts to control the narrative through social media. Shemaya's family was left to pick up the pieces, devastated by the loss of their beloved daughter, sister, and mother. Her mother, Danielle Pearson, was inconsolable, struggling with the painful reality that she could never save Shemaya from the man who had torn her apart. Her grief was raw, and every question that lingered about Shemaya's death only added to the unbearable pain. Danielle couldn't help but wonder if her daughter's death could have been avoided if only she had left sooner. If only someone had intervened before it was too late. The emotional weight of the situation was crushing. Shemaya had been a bright, hopeful young woman, full of life, and now she was gone, taken in the blink of an eye. As the investigation unfolded, the mystery surrounding her death deepened, and the questions surrounding Brian's role grew louder. Was it really self-defense, or had Shemaya been pushed too far by the man who claimed to love her? In the days that followed, as Brian continued to make his case, the reality of Shemaya's loss set in for her family. The tragic truth was that no matter how much they begged for answers, no matter how much they searched for justice, nothing could bring Shemaya back. The only thing they had left were the memories of a young woman who deserved so much more than the painful fate she met. In the days following Shemaya Allen's tragic death, Brian Jackson's behavior only deepened the suspicions surrounding him. While Shemaya's family was reeling from the loss of their beloved daughter and sister, Brian took to social media in a way that would raise more questions than answers. His reaction was cold, detached, and remarkably self-serving, starkly contrasting with the grief-stricken mourning of Shemaya's family. Rather than retreating into silence or showing any visible signs of grief, Brian made the decision to publicly control the narrative. On the day of Shemaya's death, he immediately posted on Facebook. His words were chillingly casual and devoid of the emotional anguish one would expect from a man who had just lost the mother of his child. "Whoever gave my baby mama a gun, she just broke into my house and was shot in the head," Brian wrote, as if his first priority was explaining the situation to his followers rather than processing the devastating loss. The public's response was swift and harsh. People took note of the coldness in his post, his lack of remorse, his lack of emotion, and they began to question everything. As the day went on, Brian's posts became more erratic. He went on to rant defensively, attempting to make himself the victim. In one post he wrote, "Man, forget all y'all for real, and that's on my dead baby. Yeah, I done went crazy and been doing dumb stuff." His words were riddled with contradictions and self-pity, offering little more than excuses for his behavior. The public saw this as an attempt to deflect responsibility, and the backlash was immediate. Followers began questioning why a man who had just experienced such a traumatic loss was so consumed with defending himself, instead of showing any genuine remorse for the woman he had lost. But what truly sent the public into a frenzy was a strange message that appeared on Shemaya's Facebook account just hours after her death. A lengthy post, written in a tone that seemed far too composed for someone who had just passed, apologized to Brian, saying that she regretted her decisions and that she had ruined everything by getting him locked up. The message made it seem as if Shemaya had written a final note before her death, absolving Brian of any wrongdoing. But something was off. The words felt too rehearsed, the structure too forced, and the tone far too detached for someone in distress. It didn't read like a suicide note. It read like a carefully crafted statement. Many began to wonder, had Brian written it himself, attempting to shift the blame onto Shemaya even in death? The suspicions only grew when Brian continued to post about the situation, obsessively defending himself and accusing the public of judging him unfairly. His actions were raising more eyebrows than ever, with many people questioning whether his story was true. He went from being a grieving partner to a man who seemed more focused on controlling the narrative than dealing with the tragic consequences of his actions. In stark contrast, Shemaya's family was left to grapple with the reality of their loss. Danielle Pearson, Shemaya's mother, spoke out publicly, expressing her devastation over the death of her daughter. She described Shemaya as a strong, vibrant young woman whose life had been cut short by someone who should have protected her, not manipulated her. Danielle's words were filled with raw emotion, as she mourned the loss of her child and tried to make sense of the senseless tragedy. There was no deflection in her grief, no attempt to manipulate the public. She simply wanted justice for her daughter and for the world to know the truth. As the investigation into Shemaya's death unfolded, the public began to question Brian's role in the tragedy more and more. The contradictions in his posts and the suspicious behavior only fueled the doubts about his version of events. Was it really self-defense, or had he pushed Shemaya to a point where she saw no other way out? Was the death truly a desperate act of self-preservation, or had Brian orchestrated it to cover his own guilt? The public wanted answers, but Brian's actions only made it seem like he was hiding something. The contrast between Brian's detached response and the family's genuine grief created an undeniable moral divide. The public was forced to ask, who truly held the moral high ground in this tragedy? Was it the grieving family, left with only questions and heartache, or was it Brian, whose callousness and manipulative behavior only heightened the suspicion surrounding his role in Shamaya's death? The investigation was still ongoing, but the more Brian spoke, the more he seemed to dig himself into a hole. His attempts to control the narrative only made him appear more guilty, leaving the audience questioning whether the truth would ever come to light. The loss of Shamaya Allen was felt deeply by her family, a devastating blow that left a hole no one could fill. As a daughter, sister, and mother, Shamaya's presence had been the glue that held her family together. Her mother, Danielle Pearson, was left struggling with the unbearable grief of losing her only daughter, the bright young woman she had raised with so much love. The weight of the loss was all-consuming. Danielle spoke through tears, reflecting on the dreams she had for Shamaya, the hopes of watching her grow, achieve her goals, and raise her son in a world full of possibilities. Instead, she was left with nothing but memories of a life stolen too soon. "It doesn't feel real," Danielle said, her voice choked with emotion. She was just a baby, she had so much to live for, and now I have to tell her son that he'll never see his mother again. That's the hardest part. I've lost my daughter, but my grandson, he's lost his mother. Shamaya's family struggled with the painful reality that nothing could bring her back. They couldn't undo the toxic relationship that had ultimately led to her death, nor could they reverse the manipulation and control that had isolated her from the people who truly cared. But despite their sorrow, they made it their mission to keep Shamaya's name alive and honor her memory. They were determined that her tragic story would not be forgotten, that it would serve as a warning to others. "We have to make sure this doesn't happen to anyone else," said Shamaya's sister, tears streaming down her face. What happened to Shamaya wasn't just a tragedy. It was a wake-up call for all young women out there who think that love means putting up with this kind of abuse. We need to talk about these toxic relationships, the manipulation and the control. We can't stay silent. In the wake of Shamaya's death, the family spoke out, sharing their pain and their lessons learned. They urged young women to recognize the signs of manipulation and emotional abuse before it was too late. "Love is not supposed to make you feel small," Shamaya's mother added. "It's not supposed to break you down. Love should build you up, make you feel safe, not trapped." The family's words became a powerful call to action, not just for justice but for awareness, an urgent plea for others to see the warning signs of unhealthy relationships and take action before they spiraled out of control. Shamaya's death was not in vain. Her family's efforts to raise awareness about abusive relationships gave her story a purpose beyond the heartbreak. It was a reminder that love should never come at the cost of your freedom, your identity, or your well-being. And as they honored Shamaya's memory, they hoped to spare other young women from the same fate. If you found this documentary meaningful, please like this video, share it with others, and subscribe to the channel for more content like this. Sharing Shamaya's story could help raise awareness and save lives. Let's break the silence around toxic relationships, spread the message, and ensure that no one else has to suffer in the way she did. Thank you for watching, and remember to stay aware, stay safe, and always trust your instincts.
And you said he was shot, and is he breathing?
No, I don't think so.
All right, when did this happen?
Like 5 minutes ago?
All right. And how many is injured? Is it just him?
Yes, it's just him.
All right, and how many suspects were involved?
I don't know, sir. I was there with my bed and I just heard gunshots.
All right.
Put him under the bed.
Where's that suspect at now? Do you know?
No, sir.
What would you do if the person closest to you, the one you loved, trusted, and built a life with, became your worst enemy? What if, in the dead of night, the one person you thought would protect you instead plotted your death? This is the haunting story of Quentin Lee Gray, a man who rose from humble beginnings to chase his dreams as a rapper, all while being a devoted father to 2 young sons. Known to his fans as Hood Rich Montana, Quentin seemed to have it all: ambition, talent, and the love of a woman he thought he could trust. But just hours before his life was stolen, Quentin had no idea that the woman he'd built a life with, Nyasia Perkins, was orchestrating a deadly betrayal. It was the night of December 8, 2024, when Quentin was shot multiple times in the living room of their home. The 911 call Nyasia made was filled with frantic desperation, her voice trembling as she told dispatchers her boyfriend had been shot. But as authorities arrived on the scene, the story began to fall apart. No signs of forced entry. No broken windows. No struggle. Just Quentin's lifeless body, and his 2 young children, left alone in the chaos. At first it seemed like a robbery gone wrong, a random act of violence. But something didn't sit right with the investigators. Nyasia's story kept changing, and the evidence pointed to something far more sinister than a home invasion. A pattern began to emerge. A chilling conspiracy involving not just Nyasia but someone else. A man who was no stranger to violence. This is a case of betrayal so deep, it will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about loyalty and love. But the truth behind Quentin's murder? It's darker and far more calculated than anyone ever imagined. And what the investigators uncovered next will change everything. This story isn't just about a crime, it's about betrayal, trust, and the consequences of hidden motives. Quentin Lee Gray's murder is a stark reminder that sometimes, the people we trust the most can be the ones who harm us the most. But what really drove Nyasia Perkins to betray the man she once called her partner? We want to hear your thoughts. Was this a crime of passion or something much more calculated? Do you think there are still pieces of this story we haven't uncovered yet? We know many of you might have experienced betrayal or know someone who has. Your voices matter, and sharing your experiences can help shed light on the emotional toll such events take. Drop your opinion in the comments below. Tell us what you think happened, and if you've ever faced a situation that made you question the people closest to you. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more true crime stories that will keep you thinking long after the video ends. Quentin Lee Gray, better known by his rap name, Hood Rich Montana, was a name that echoed through the streets of Kinston, North Carolina. A man with dreams too big for the small town he came from, Quentin wasn't just an artist, he was a father, a son, a man determined to carve out a better life, not just for himself, but for the 2 little boys who depended on him. Rising through the ranks of a tough industry, Quentin poured his soul into his music. His voice, raw and real, spoke of struggles and triumphs. His rise from the bottom and the unyielding fight to make it to the top.
Everybody around me keep leaving. Play with my feelings and I don't give them a reason. They take my heart and they break it all into pieces. It seems like everybody around me keep leaving. Lost someone so close to me and lately ain't been feeling right. This ain't how it's supposed to be. I go to sleep with chills at night. Don't know where my soul will be if I don't ever heal it right. When you lose your soldier to that toaster, it's that feeling right. When I lost my partner, I was caught up in that whirlwind. Load up all them shots with my shot and we surging. We put on that.
His music was his escape, his way of telling the world that no matter where he came from, he could make it. But for Quentin, the stage wasn't just about fame, it was about securing a future for his sons, Gianni and Amiri. Every lyric he wrote, every late-night recording session, was driven by the love he had for his children. Gianni and Amiri were everything to him, his motivation, his reason for pushing through the toughest days. Quentin wasn't just building a music career, he was building a legacy for them, a legacy that would outlast the struggles and the hardships of his past. Through sleepless nights, through the grinding hustle, Quentin kept his focus on one goal, to give his boys a life he never had. He knew it wasn't going to be easy, but he was prepared to fight for it. No matter the cost, no matter the sacrifices. But little did Quentin know, the life he was fighting for, the life he dreamed of for his children, was about to be stolen away by the very person he trusted the most. To the outside world, Nyasia Perkins and Quentin Lee Gray were the epitome of a perfect couple. 2 souls bound together by love, their happiness on display for everyone to see. Social media posts flooded with photos of smiles, family gatherings, and words of devotion. Nyasia often shared her pride in Quentin's success, calling him her everything, while Quentin publicly declared his love for her and their 2 sons. 4 years they built a life together, a life full of shared dreams and ambitions. They were a family, seemingly inseparable. Quentin, the hard-working father striving to give his children a better future, and Nyasia, the woman who appeared to stand by his side every step of the way. But behind the perfectly posed pictures, beneath the constant declarations of love, things weren't as flawless as they seemed. The cracks were starting to show, small, unspoken tensions that neither of them truly addressed. In moments when no one was watching, there were signs of something much darker brewing. Nyasha was becoming increasingly distant, her patience wearing thin. Jealousy began to creep in, of Quentin's success, his time away from home, the energy he poured into his music. It wasn't just about the long hours or his dreams anymore. It was the distance between them, the slow erosion of trust, and the resentment that began to bubble beneath the surface. In the quiet moments, whispers of doubt grew louder. Unspoken frustration festered, and while Quentin focused on his career and his children, Nyasha's heart was becoming colder, filled with resentment. She wasn't just standing by his side, she was waiting for something more. But behind closed doors, Nyasha's intentions were far from loving. The jealousy, the anger, the growing need for control, it was all beginning to consume her. And what seemed like a happy relationship was starting to unravel, setting the stage for a betrayal no one could have ever predicted. What was really brewing beneath the surface? What dark intentions was Nyasha hiding, and how far would she go to see them fulfilled?
And you said he was shot and is he breathing?
No, I don't think so.
Alright, when did this happen?
Like 5 minutes ago?
Alright. And how many is injured? Is it just him?
Yes, it's just him.
Alright, and how many suspects were involved?
I don't know, sir. I was there with my bed and I just heard gunshots. I
Alright,
put him under the bed.
where's that suspect at now? Do you know?
No, sir.
As the first responders arrived at the scene, the tension was palpable. What was supposed to be a tragic home invasion, an innocent family caught in the middle of a robbery gone wrong, quickly began to unravel. Quentin Gray, the rising rapper known as Hoodrich Montana, lay motionless in the living room, shot multiple times. His body, positioned unnaturally, seemed almost staged, as if someone had carefully placed him there. His 2 young sons, terrified and confused, were found huddled in the corner of the room, their wide eyes the only sign of the terror they had just witnessed. There were no broken windows, no kicked-in doors. No signs of a struggle, no signs of anyone forcing their way inside. The front door was locked from the inside. The windows were intact. No signs of valuables being taken. Nothing to suggest the robbery Nyasha had described. As investigators began combing through the scene, a chilling realization set in. This was not a random act of violence. The details, the lack of chaos, and the unnatural positioning of Quentin's body painted a different picture. One of deliberate execution, not a hurried crime of passion. The murder weapon was missing, but there was no sign of forced entry, no footprints leading away from the house, no fleeing suspect. It was almost as if the killer had been invited in, or had never left. As the investigation progressed, everything pointed back to one key question. Who was the true mastermind behind this cold-blooded act? Was this truly a home invasion, or had Nyasha orchestrated the most shocking betrayal of all? The woman who had once stood beside Quentin, the mother of his children, the one who had cried for him in front of the world, could she have been the one to pull the strings? Was she the one who planned his brutal execution, in cold blood? The pieces were starting to fall into place, but the truth, dark and twisted, was only beginning to surface. Was this truly a home invasion, or had Nyasha orchestrated the most shocking betrayal of all? Keep watching to uncover the truth. As the investigation unfolded, investigators began to dig deeper into the details Nyasha had provided. Her story, initially filled with panic and fear, began to unravel. The inconsistencies started to surface, small details that didn't quite add up. What seemed like a desperate attempt to protect her children was beginning to look more like an elaborate lie. There was no sign of forced entry at the house. No broken windows, no kicked-in doors, nothing to suggest a home invasion. The front door was locked from the inside. The windows were untouched, and the living room showed no signs of a struggle. Quentin's body was positioned too perfectly, too carefully. The blood around him had pooled, but nothing was disturbed. There were no signs of a fight. No overturned furniture. No scuffle. Just a lifeless body, placed in a way that seemed deliberate. Nyasha had claimed she was asleep in bed when the shots were fired. Yet, according to the timeline, there was something off. The phone records didn't match up. Nyasha's calls and messages were active well after the time she had claimed to be sleeping. Her social media activity, too, was strangely calm, almost too calm for someone who had just witnessed a brutal murder. Hours after Quentin's death, Nasa made a series of posts on her social media account. She posted, "Really just numb, sick to the stomach, to it all. I see everyone's messages and calls. I appreciate all the words. Heartbroken that our boys don't know what's going on. All they know." She posted a picture of the two together with their son with a caption that read, "I can't stop looking at pictures of us." She posted another pic of him, captioned, "My favorite one." In another post, she posted a pic of Quentin and the two boys, captioned, "Never going to forget the things you taught me and the things you told me. Always watch the board." She also posted concerning Quentin funeral service saying, "Everybody that think they going to be at Hoodrich, Montana service, y'all not. He only F with a few and they know who they are. And the people he didn't EFF with, y'all know who y'all are. He already told me he don't want none of y'all fake mother effers in his stuff. Sorry but not sorry." She also posted, "It's about that time, bae. I'm glad I gave you your flowers while you was here. I love you. Thank you for everything. I'm going to try my best to be as strong as you. Me, Gianni, and Amir love you. I wish this never happened to you, Hoodrich, Montana. Burgundy for you. Hoodrich, Montana, watch over us, bae. We love you until we meet again." Her grief appeared to fade too quickly. Her posts, once filled with words of sorrow and loss, quickly turned to anger and exclusion. It was as though the public mourning was a performance, a mask hiding something much more sinister. The security footage from the neighborhood revealed even more troubling details. Nyaja's car was parked in front of the house that night, but no unfamiliar vehicles were seen leaving the scene. There were no suspects fleeing the house, no cars speeding away in the dead of night. It was as if the crime had been planned, controlled. The lack of urgency in the footage, the absence of any sign of panic, spoke volumes. As investigators dug deeper, one name kept coming up: Calvin Coley, Nyaja's co-worker. A man with a violent past, one that had been kept hidden from Quentin. Calvin had a history, charged with attempted murder just a few years earlier. But what was his connection to Quentin's death? What role had he played in this twisted scheme? Calvin and Nyaja had been in contact frequently before and after the murder. Text messages between them seemed to confirm what investigators were beginning to fear. This wasn't a crime of passion. This was a conspiracy, cold, calculated, and premeditated. The pieces were falling into place, but the truth was far from clear. Calvin's name kept emerging in the investigation, and the deeper the authorities dug, the more connections between him and Nyaja came to light. Were they working together? Was this a crime orchestrated by the two of them, plotting, planning, and executing a murder to silence the very man who trusted them both? Or was Nyaja hiding something even darker, something more dangerous? Nyaja had played the part of a grieving girlfriend well, but now the facade was starting to crack. The inconsistencies in her story were too glaring to ignore. And as Calvin Coley's involvement became clearer, one question lingered in the air. What was the connection between Nyaja and Calvin? And why did Nyaja seem to be hiding more than just grief? What was the true extent of their betrayal? And what would it cost them when the truth finally came to light? Keep watching as the mystery unravels. Days had passed since Quentin Lee Gray's brutal murder, and the investigation was gaining momentum. Nyaja Perkins had played her role perfectly, grief-stricken, distraught, yet strangely calm in the days after her boyfriend's death. But her calm was about to be shattered in the most unexpected way. At her workplace, Nyaja was caught off guard. One moment she was lost in her routine, her expression neutral, her actions methodical, and the next she was facing the officers who had come to arrest her. There was no struggle, no protest. Just the quiet, cold realization that the facade of grief she had been wearing had finally been pierced. There was no outburst, no pleading. Nyaja simply sat there, her eyes locking with the officers as they read her the charges. First-degree murder. Felony conspiracy. The words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of betrayal. It was almost as if she had been waiting for this moment, her calmness betraying nothing but the stillness of someone who had long since planned her next move. She didn't resist. She didn't cry out in panic. She didn't even seem surprised. Nyaja's arrest was eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the explosive revelations that had led to this moment. Her lack of emotion, her stone-cold composure, sent a shiver down the spine of everyone watching. But Nyaja wasn't the only one who had a part to play in the deadly conspiracy. Calvin Coley, her co-worker, and a man with a violent history, was next. Calvin, unlike Nyaja, wasn't prepared for the officers to come for him. The moment he saw them, his eyes flickered with panic. He tried to evade capture, darting into the back of the building, hoping to hide behind stacks of inventory. But his escape was futile. The walls were closing in on him, and there was nowhere left to run. Like Nyaja, Calvin's arrest was quiet. No shouting, no resistance. The calmness of his demeanor as he was taken into custody was unsettling, almost as if he had accepted his fate the moment the investigation turned its gaze on him. The silence of their arrests was deafening. Two people, two suspects, whose involvement in Quentin's death seemed undeniable. But their lack of reaction, their cold demeanor, only deepened the mystery. Was this the guilt of two individuals caught in the act? Or was there something more, something darker, lurking beneath the surface of their stoic faces? Their arrests were the beginning of something much larger. As investigators dug deeper, the connections between Nyasha and Calvin grew more complex. There were whispers of something darker, of a conspiracy that stretched far beyond what anyone had expected. 2 arrests, 2 suspects. But what other secrets were hiding just beneath the surface of this chilling conspiracy? And who else might be involved in the web of lies that led to Quentin's untimely death? The courtroom was charged with emotion. On one side, Quentin's family, their faces twisted in anguish, the weight of their loss still fresh, their hearts broken by the brutal murder of their loved one. His mother, sitting in the front row, eyes red and swollen from tears, glared at the 2 accused, Nyasha and Calvin, who stood calmly before the judge. The anger and pain in the room were palpable, a silent cry for justice. But while Quentin's family felt every ounce of the loss, Nyasha and Calvin stood there with cold indifference. Nyasha, the woman who had once claimed to love Quentin, appeared emotionless, her face a mask of detachment. Calvin, the man who had pulled the trigger, stood just as still, his eyes fixed forward, betraying nothing. The contrast between the grief in the room and their lack of reaction made the atmosphere even more unnerving. As the prosecution laid out its case, the evidence was overwhelming. Phone records revealed a pattern of communication between Nyasha and Calvin, texts and calls in the days leading up to Quentin's murder. Messages that hinted at a conspiracy, a shared plan, and a cold determination to see it through. Surveillance footage from the neighborhood confirmed their involvement. There were no signs of a random intruder, no signs of a chaotic home invasion. Everything pointed to a well-thought-out execution. Forensic analysis only solidified the prosecution's case. The blood splatter patterns, the positioning of Quentin's body, everything suggested a careful, methodical plan. This was no crime of passion. It was calculated, deliberate, and cold. The prosecution's case was airtight. Every detail, every piece of evidence, reinforced the guilt of both Nyasha and Calvin. Quentin's family sat in disbelief as the truth of his betrayal was laid bare. The woman who had once been his partner, the man who had once been his friend, had conspired together to take his life. The depth of the deception, the extent of the planning, was more than they could bear. As the prosecution continued, one question hung in the air: how could 2 people so close to Quentin betray him so completely? And with each new piece of evidence, it became clear that the truth was more twisted, more sinister than anyone had imagined. As the case unfolds, what other shocking details might emerge that could change the course of this case forever? What secrets are still lurking beneath the surface, waiting to be uncovered? Quentin Lee Gray's death left a void that could never be filled. His mother, overwhelmed by grief, was inconsolable, her heart shattered by the loss of her son. The pain of knowing that he was taken so violently, so unexpectedly, was unbearable. But for his 2 young sons, Gianni and Amiri, the devastation was something else entirely. They were left fatherless, trying to make sense of a world where their protector, their hero, was suddenly gone. How do you explain to a child that their father will never come home? How do you comfort them when the person responsible for their pain is the very one who was supposed to love him the most? Quentin's death echoed through the community. Friends, family, and neighbors all found themselves searching for answers. The man they knew, a loving father, a hard-working son, was gone, and the person responsible was someone they never expected. Nyasha, the mother of his children, the woman who had been by his side. The sense of betrayal was palpable. How could she, the one who should have protected him, be the one to end his life? For those who loved Quentin, the pain wasn't just from his death. It was the crushing reality that the person who had betrayed him was someone he had trusted with his heart. Nyasha had stood beside him in public, but behind closed doors she had pulled the strings of a plan that would forever alter their lives. As the truth about Quentin's death begins to surface, could there be more shocking revelations to come? What other secrets lie hidden beneath the surface of this tragic betrayal? Quentin Lee Gray's death wasn't just a loss for his family, it was a loss for the community, for the world of music, and for his 2 young sons, who will grow up never truly knowing the man who gave them everything. The betrayal came from the one person who was supposed to love him, the one person who shared his life, his dreams, and his future. His mother, who had raised him with love and hope, now faced the heartbreaking reality of losing her son to a senseless, brutal act. And for his sons, Gianni and Amiri, their father's absence would echo in their lives forever. They would never know the dreams he had for them, the life he had planned to give them. Quentin's legacy was more than just his music, it was the love he had for his children, the sacrifices he made to build a better life. He fought for his future, for the future of his family, and for the dreams that seemed just within reach. But that future was stolen away by the hands of those he trusted the most, and now his story would be forever marked by the cruelest of betrayals. But the truth behind Quentin's death isn't finished unfolding yet. As the investigation continues, new questions arise. Could there be more people involved in this cold-blooded plot? The web of lies and betrayal runs deeper than anyone could have imagined, and the investigation is far from over. As the truth continues to unravel, one thing is certain. This story is not over, and the darkest secrets may still be waiting to be exposed. If you found this story compelling, make sure to comment below with your thoughts. Who do you think was behind the darker parts of this conspiracy? Don't forget to like, share with others who need to hear this story, and subscribe to our channel for more gripping true crime tales. The search for justice continues, and we want you to be a part of it. Stay tuned, more shocking truths are yet to come.